Hello there. Hi. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is episode 11 of the Kids Health series with Lawrence August. Hi, Lawrence. How are you?
Hello there. Number
Nice,
11.
nice. Number 11. Nice to see you again.
Good seeing you. High five.
Woohoo.
You doing
But
that?
oops.
Wait.
Yeah.
Oh, what?
One,
There.
1, 2, 3. That was like it. 1, 2. Oh my God, Lawrence.
There
One.
must be a delay on your end.
I think 1, 2, 3. There is.
Okay.
There is a delay. Okay.
Perfect. Well, that'll just add excitement.
Da 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 da. Lawrence brought up a good topic, a good idea. I think it's good to talk about doing your own research, and I do think this is really important for kids' health because moms and dads and homes, they're inundated with information from specialists, from corporations, from the government, from all these places. But how do you navigate doing your own research? So,
Right.
especially when it comes to your kids. What do you
Yeah.
think?
What does that actually mean? Right.
Yeah.
We're in an information age that is just careening out of control nowadays. We're not starving for information. If anything, we're flooded with it to the point where there's a fair amount of overwhelm. And for me, people are looking to me for answers. Well, what do you think about this? Every day there's a new headline. What do you think about this article? I just read this article about this supplement or about this drug or this announcement or this headline. And, being at this as long as I have, it's been a very interesting journey with that. Like most people, when you're in the beginning of a journey of learning about a topic, you don't know anything. And then whatever it is that you're so excited that you know something that you like instantly become an expert, right? And that was the case for me, at least for me. If you talk to me 20, 30, heck, 40 years ago, I started really researching, reading about nutrition at a very young age, around 8 years old. So this is like, literally 4 decades. And then as I got into high school, I was very, proud of what I knew, and I wanted to tell everybody about it. And the odd thing that has happened through the years is the more I've learned, the more I realize how little I know. And it's very humbling. And I think that because I've had decades now of experience in this kind of progress along a certain topic, that topic being nutrition, I think I have something to offer in terms of advice to those who are listening out there of how to think about this idea of doing your own research, more of a mental framework and a couple key strategies than so much of like, this is exactly how to do it. But I think just some really good questions to ask. Have you heard of what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect?
No.
Yeah. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is this idea that I just spoke about where, people tend to, at the beginning of learning about a subject matter, their own personal beliefs about how well they know that subject matter is pretty inflated. So it's this kind of Dunning and Kruger effect where they have all the answers, right?
Yeah.
And we see a lot of that on the internet. I've listened to a few podcasts. I've read a few books. I know everything there is about that subject. And this is one of the biggest obstacles when it comes to doing your own research is yourself.
Yeah.
It really is yourself. And it was that way for me, is because we begin to move toward information that is satisfying for us, that confirms our own beliefs. And this Dunning-Kruger is this kind of like, I know so much about this subject, even though the actual amount that you know is very little. And what tends to happen over time is you know more and more and more and more about the subject. And all of a sudden you realize with each new thing you're learning, like, wow, this is a never ending journey. And I know way less than I thought.
Yeah.
So being aware of that trajectory is really important wherever you're at in that trajectory. If you're brand new to, researching into topics and learning about, brand new issues, I would caution everybody to just look into the Dunning-Kruger effect and don't be one of those Dunning-Kruger people. It'll save you a lot of headache. Humble up.
Humble up.
Yes, humble up. And then that kind of goes into the next area, which is confirmation bias. And we all have this. Confirmation bias is we are going to seek out information that confirms our own biases. And that is just natural. If we have a natural inclination, against big pharma or against, mainstream this and that, or maybe we have a natural inclination against herbs and against supplements, right? That's on that other side, right? Maybe we're completely opposed philosophically to a certain point of view, that we will seek out studies, research, articles that kind of prop up our point of view. And this is, so right out the gate are things to be to be cautious about, is know thyself when it comes to this. And so my solution to that problem, or at least a working strategy to that problem, is I'm really a big believer in find the opposing arguments first. So whatever that your position is, like if you have a position on a subject matter, right? Let's go into something really controversial. Let's say fluoride, right? Okay, fluoride, right? We know that fluoride is a fairly controversial issue. We've got fluoridation of water, fluoride in your toothpaste. We call it Poison Control Center. If you, right?
Yep.
All these things.
Calcitosis. Yeah.
All this. Now, if your natural leaning is toward, well, fluoride is evil, it's harmful, the Nazis used it, blah, 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 I know it's bad, you will find a lot of information to support that. However, if you actually are asked, well, support your position, it would be wise to know what the arguments for fluoride are, right?
For why they say it's good.
Why they say it's good. So when you understand that, it's called steel manning the argument. Have you ever heard that phrase?
No.
So a straw man, a lot of people have heard, right? So a straw man is where you're kind of taking your opponent's argument and you're setting up, you're moving their argument to something that you can easily defeat, right? So it's making a straw man argument. Now, to steel man an argument is to actually take your opponent's argument, point of view, and argue for their side, like just as a way to actually test your own, your own findings, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So if I can argue the opposition's point of view better than them, I know what their strongest arguments are. Then I can now search for information that goes up against those strongest arguments, right?
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
And when you can do that and you can test those side by side, you're getting closer to what we would say would be the truth. Now, there's no perfect way of ever discerning what is perfectly true. I feel like, that in terms of like, you're never going to have absolute, perfect, pure knowledge. But I think it's a great framework. Know your biases, know where you're at in the Dunning-Kruger journey, and be able to argue an opposing viewpoint as perfectly as you can. I think it's a great starting point for diving into a topic, so that you can have a really well-rounded sense of, I know what, the mainstream is saying, right? And I can give you a recent, if you'd like, I can give you like a recent world example. Mm-hmm. In these last several months, there's been a lot of headlines about melatonin. And, a lot of alarming headlines. Melatonin, people are taking too much, 5 milligrams is the limit, and a lot of sort of fear-mongery type of headlines. Okay. And in a recent situation, there was a report about calls to the Poison Control Center. And X amount of calls to the Poison Control Center involved melatonin. Now, a headline could be written that's very scary for that, right? Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to know, okay, I'm gonna read all of these articles that are saying this about melatonin. Okay, let's see what they're having to say, find out what the argument is. And when I realized, okay, well, their strongest argument they had was this Poison Control Center report. Okay, that's what they're putting forward, and they seem to have some good data. But when you actually looked at the report, when you actually looked at that source material, what you found was that when you make a phone call to the poison control center, they're going to ask, what's everything that's gone into that person's body?
Okay.
So that does not mean that everything that went into that person's body poisoned them, right? That just ended up on the report, right? So if you drank a bottle of Listerine and then you happen to take a melatonin the night before and then you're not feeling good, well, the melatonin is going to be on that report, but maybe the fact that you just downed a bottle of Listerine was a problem. It was associated with, it had nothing to do with causality.
Okay.
So do you see that this is
Yeah.
so I needed to know what they were saying first. I mean, I saw the headline and go, well, that's BS, right? But I'm like, well, why are they saying that? Why are they saying that 5 milligrams of I don't understand this.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went to the source of safety data on melatonin, I found out that 3,750 milligrams is the high end of toxicity for melatonin. 3,750.
Not 5.
And I could point that out to people very quickly.
Yes.
And then, and again, to people out there, no, do not take 3,750
I know, right?
But the point is, when we're actually trying to tease this out, we're living in an age of headlines. Okay, headlines are going to grab people, clickbait.
Yep.
And the headline's going to read a certain way, and it's going to make you feel a certain way. And it's there for a reason, to grab your attention and make you feel a certain way.
That's it.
What I found to be very interesting was, why was there seemingly out of nowhere a kind of an attack on melatonin, which was very odd, right? And we could get into that on a separate show, but you know, so it's really important to kind of find out first what the claims are, you know, rather than just saying, like, dismiss it, go, okay, well, what are they actually saying? And then seek out the details, find out the details, go to the source material, right? Find out what that actually said. Now, that gets into the next part is, most people aren't equipped to read scientific studies.
Right. It's
right?
gibberish to them. Yeah.
They're written for other scientists to be able to check each other's work. And in approaching, I look at research papers almost daily. You know that. You've known me a long time. Like, I'm research paper guy. And I would say that there are certain things that the everyday person can do, especially now in today's day and age of technology and how we can use the technology. One thing that you can do with a paper is you can read the abstract of a paper, which is a general summary, right? And you want to consider the source of that paper. You want to consider, was that study funded by XYZ company? That does not mean that it's necessarily a bad paper, but it might color, you know, the biases of the researchers. And we've seen that, right? Was it an observational study? Was it a randomized control study? What type of study was it? Was it a single study on this topic? Are there hundreds of others? So you want to look for things like what are called meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is a study of studies. Those tend to hold a lot of weight. So a meta-analysis might feature 450 studies on a certain topic. And looking at the meta-analysis, these are some conclusions we've derived. So it's important to tease out those factors. Was it just a single thing? Was it, peer-reviewed, right? We also have an issue with peer review, though, right? Peer review, I don't think we should get rid of peer review, but peer review has its own flaws, right? People are people. A very small amount of people that are doing the peer review. In other words, there's a very small amount of scientists that are doing the majority of peer review. So there's things like burnout. There's imperfect interpretation. There is often like a delay in that because it takes time. And during those delays, new information might be coming out. So by the time that report is out and it's peer reviewed, another study might have looked at a subject matter a different way. So it's not also perfect, but it gets you a little bit closer, right? It
Gotcha.
gets you a little bit closer to, what we would call the truth, right? And in looking at this, I think that ask yourself, why is it important to you to be, spending a lot of time on this subject? You know, I know, like Heidi, let's just like open it up, like in terms of like as a mom, right?
Mhm.
And you've
Mhm.
had to kind of do your own research, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Right. And in your experience, there are certain things that you've probably had to go up against, and you've had strong conviction, right, of the why you're actually researching these topics,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So picking really strong reasons why, and to be able to spend your time on a topic, I think is also important, that you're not kind of like going down rabbit holes that you don't need. I
Right, you
think
gotta stay
picking
focused.
high priority items is also another kind of important thing when it comes to doing your own research, because this stuff takes time.
Oh my gosh, the time. Well, I'm just to not pivot, but time. That's what I've been thinking of during this. So it's information war. The war on consciousness is the war on information as well. And as far as time, when I myself a mom diving into the medical choice and the medical things because I saw firsthand what happened to my own baby and child. I put in so many hours and so much time, and then some of the mom communities they want it handed to them. Show me your step by step. And for a long time, I was doing that. I was hand holding, I was showing them ABCD. And then I see these same parents go on other threads asking the same question. I'm like, I just gave you my time. I just gave you all my
Right.
research. And it got a little frustrating, but then it was like, well, this is what I want to share what I've learned. This happened recently in 2020 when I was talking about
Yeah.
helping yourself and protecting yourself. And the
Sure.
big old parasite cleanses, I was doing them. So I was sharing my contact and my research, but I was telling them step by step what I did. Wasn't it good enough? According to their perspective and their eyes, oh, I can't do that. And then they dig and they dig and they dig. It's like there has to be a respect, I think, of information given. You have to respect somebody for the time they do put into it and the time they give you in sharing and how they saved you days and weeks and hours of research. But you can't just take it and run with it. You do have to discern and you do have to adjust and pivot your way through someone else's information because what worked for them might not work for you. So it is taking in tons of info, but you're your ultimate um, factor to discern what is appropriate for you and your family or not. But I did
Sure.
hit those walls of like, man, I feel used and drained and I wasn't like hoarding my information, but it did get to a point where I'm like, well, if you're not going to use it or you're going to judge me for it, why are you even asking me? Go look for it yourself. And then you and I getting hit so hard since 2017, 18,
Yeah.
censorship, before censorship was cool. We were getting it so hard. And it's like, well, I wouldn't be getting censored this hard if I wasn't over topic. But when people see you get censored that hard, they don't trust. So it's a war. It's a
Yeah. So
war.
it's a war of information. It's a battle for trust. We've seen a big loss of trust in institutions over the last few years, and I think it's well deserved loss of trust. I think it's opening up a lot of eyes. I think that the incentives are a problem.
Mm.
That we've got a situation where the incentives are all wrong as far as, you know, how the information is going to be given to us. You can design studies to get the outcomes that you're going to want to see. There's a lot of things that are uh, very, very, very difficult to navigate, to be honest. And this is why I always say to approach this with humility, because you won't be certain. And this is the other thing that goes to that. When you are listening to somebody speak on a topic, if they have absolute certainty and they have literally lack humility and they know for sure they have the perfect answer. I mean, obviously there's going to be some low-hanging fruit where that might be the case, but on complicated topics, if people seem too certain, they probably got a little Dunning-Kruger going on for themselves, right?
That's my new
The
favorite word.
our humble experts are typically the ones that have kind of been around the block and are like, you know, there's a trade-off for everything. right?
Mhm.
I think that people, when fear sets in, certainty is really comforting. Give me the
Mhm.
answer. Is it A or it's B? And then it's kind of like, I hate to tell you, but it's not, I'm big on nuance, right? Is a Twinkie good or bad? Most people say, well, it's bad. Well, if you're starving, remember,
Right.
Twinkie
You
is
said that.
medicine.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
we just can't
Perspective.
say that. Is water good or bad? I don't know. Are you, you know, are you in a desert and you're
Mhm.
without water? Water's great. Are you in an ocean and you can't swim? Water's dangerous.
Mhm.
We need context for all of these things. And there are typical attacks that people make on each other, these ad hominem attacks. I think instead of attacking people when we're in these debates online or when we're trying to get information out, go to the ideas. We want to attack ideas and not people.
Yes.
You know, um,
Amen. Mhm.
because I think that's the thing that concerns me the most about society right now is that
Yeah.
it gets to the point where it's like name calling and we're not actually talking about topics anymore.
Yeah.
We've
And it
just
was
gotten
intended that way, I think. I mean, this information war and this inundate with information, getting confused and what have, and then the people just fight, you know.
sure.
It's
There's just this kind of like, however we've gotten here to the point where, you know, to try to convince somebody and then by calling them a name, it's just not going to work, right? Um, and even data, we know sadly enough that even when presented with actual data, people tend to kind of still tune out because they are going to lean toward their confirmation biases. So it is, an approach of humility. And I think with the new wave of technology, I want to kind of segue into that. The key to the future is going to be to understand prompting. And I
mm,
want to talk a little bit about this. And in fact, there are some great sites. There's one, it's literally called Learn Prompting. Let me double check on that for you. Learnprompting.com, where you can learn how to properly prompt and work with AI. Okay, it's
okay.
learnprompting.org. Now, why am I bringing up prompting? Because
Mm,
it's literally going to make or break you in the coming landscape ahead.
mm.
Before,
That's AI, you mean?
yeah,
Because
prompt.
there's going to be a lot of resistance. That's
Well,
people are still got the.
Well, prompting. Look, the thing is that it's just not going to go away. So you can think,
No.
and people can think what they want, but you're gonna
Mhm.
get steamrolled if you don't understand this. Like you're just
And
gonna get wrecked.
it's been coming in for decades too, people. You have
Yeah,
to
you're
realize
gonna
that.
get wrecked.
I was one that used to be like, no to the AI. Transhuman agenda is just not about computers.
It's
It's a
right.
lot of things. We need to
It,
know how to control it and not let it control us.
understand it,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
prompting is basically a sophisticated ways of get the most out of whatever interface you're dealing with, and to be able to ask really, really good questions to get high quality answers. What
Okay.
most people don't need more answers, they need better questions.
Mm,
You need to learn better questions to get good quality information. So I would highly recommend learnprompting.org. And there's a gazillion others out there right now, but this one is great. And that's going to basically empower people with the ability to prompt correctly so that they get the answers that they're looking for. Now, I will say this with things like ChatGPT and all these things, they give bad answers still, right? I mean, the answers aren't good. And this is
there's
why,
still prejudice and once right, like when you're
yeah, I mean, they have biases and
opinionated.
as
Yeah.
well. Like there's certain, you can definitely check that out. You can A/B test that as well. Um, so it's really kind of a way to think about research and curiosity, and at the bottom of that is humility. And I think that really is what the scientific method is. And I think that's why people were so frustrated at the level of arrogance that they saw over the last few years, where it's like, we are the science. And it was like the whole idea of questioning it seemed to be out of the question.
And that's
And
what science is.
kind of like, I'm trying to actually do science here.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, we've discovered that things were kept, things were hidden, things were changed. Information was, rotten, dirty, whatever. Yep.
Mhm.
Bark for it.
It's
louder for the people in the back. And so I think we're just kind of in this time where it's going to only get more ramped up in the battle for our minds, where it gets to the point where, even AI could be controlling those conversations. So we want to know that this is a tool, but our humanity still matters. And it does get to the point where when we get into the idea of, okay, what am I going to take with this information? Then how much am I going to like trust my gut? Right. And that's where in like a
Yes.
really big part of that. And
Yes.
there is really what is called the precautionary principle with this kind of thing. And the precautionary principle is exactly how it sounds is, before I advance into putting something into my body or making a decision that carries with it some amount of risk, what's my benefit? What's my risk? How do I weigh that? And knowing that, you're not a statistic, you're not a study. When they do studies, they're going to do large populations, right? So they're going to do a study, and if the population at large is unhealthy and the population at large is overweight and 50% of adults have heart disease, and right. So if we know all that, and we know that maybe none of those things apply to us, then we can use that as a gauge and saying, well, I actually don't fit the sample here. I am a one of one. We all are. And it's important to understand that as well as like who like when we're looking at studies, like who are these studies done on? Were they done on humans? Were they done on rats? Was it done as a computer model? We were up against that. These computer models at the beginning of 2020 told us that it was just going to be like, the Black Plague.
Uh-huh.
And those computer models were all wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And those were quote unquote expert computer, modeling people doing this, right?
I totally believe you can change your timeline. With every choice you make, you're changing your own trajectory and timeline. So imagine what a collective can do when you're consciously living. Like we
Sure.
can change all those. That's not a AI takeover. That's
we
us still having a human experience.
We cannot ignore the real world laboratory that is just, nature and time. I mean, if we know that throughout 10,000 years, humans have used this particular, herb and in this capacity, maybe it's never been studied in a lab. So maybe you could call that unproven, but unproven is not disproven. That's not what that means. And then we heard a lot about that. Well, that's an unproven treatment. Correct? Hasn't been disproven. And the other important thing to know about that is that we are living, unfortunately, in a top-down hierarchy of information, meaning these top institutions have grabbed a hold of the narrative and the power where they are sending down the information to below. And the problem with that is that when you have frontline situations, when it comes to doctors or people on the front lines, moms that are there with their kids seeing this in real time day to day, that kind of information should be moved up to the top.
Thank you.
Right?
Yes.
It should be a bottom up. In other words, hey, we're seeing this down on the ground. Change the policy, move them up on top accordingly, or help us out here. It hasn't been that way for quite some time.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it's like, these are the guidelines, these are the rules. It's coming down to you. So it's going down to, now we're kind of getting into the, the doctor thing of like, we have a situation here in California for anybody listening outside of California, but we have a situation where there's essentially like a gag order on doctors where they have to be very careful if they say something that is considered misinformation. Well, we don't know. You don't know what is or isn't misinformation right away. Things can change. New information can come along. So who is deciding that? So now us in California, we're also in a unique position where we have to kind of take on, unfortunately, we kind of have to kind of take on a little bit more of our own responsibility with finding out information for ourselves.
Yes. I like that. I'm like,
and sharing that, and the best, I will say this, that if you can find it, the best kind of delivery of a, let's say information on a research paper would be where someone could literally walk you through, where somebody could literally like have a video and say, this is how the study was done. And this is it. And like literally, well, I think most people would do really well if they could seek out those kind of explanations, because they're going to go point by point. And when someone's willing to go point by point with a paper or with an article, it means that really taking care to the information within. Because the other thing I see a lot is just people cherry picking and jumping to conclusions, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm just going to go by one line in the paper or one, component of it that fits whatever it is that I wanted to. And we're not really being walked through the study design, the results, the methodologies. And so there's a lot of resources now. And, I always push back when people are like, oh, did you learn about that on YouTube? Or did someone in a Facebook group tell you that? Well, yeah, those are platforms. I always say it's like, that's a platform. That's all that is.
One of the many. Yeah.
You could have somebody perfectly qualified on a platform like a YouTube or a Rumble or whatever, giving a great presentation that is accurate. It's them being on the internet. I mean, we're all here on the internet. What are we going to do? Right. There can be people without degrees that have just a really wonderful understanding of a topic. There could be people with degrees that don't know anything. You could be a good anything or a bad anything. Qualifications do matter. Qualifications do indicate something, but at the end of the day, follow the data. The data is, what we should be concerned with. And then knowing, like, do we trust that data? And unfortunately, that's kind of where we're at now, where a couple of things have happened in the last few years where do we even know to trust that data? Because it's one thing to argue about what the data is and what it means, but then it's a whole other thing to go, is that data actually legit?
Yeah.
Was that just fabricated?
Well, that's where I can get all hippie woo woo and say that's when you need to be so lined up with yourself and of sound body and mind and healthy and clean, cleansed and detox that your radar will tell you usually, at least where I guess that's own individual discernment, because what one radar might not be the same as someone else's. So I just stand correct myself.
But there is some interesting data on that. There's a book called Power versus Force, if anybody's heard of that book. But, we get into applied kinesiology, advanced muscle testing, a lot of that stuff that even, myself, like many years ago, would think like, oh my God, that's really like hippie and woo woo and out there. But like, it's pretty incredible.
Oh, shoot. We do the muscle testing all the time. Yeah. Our galactic man does it too.
It's pretty incredible, actually.
Yeah.
But a lot of that stuff, I mean, I know firsthand. I worked in the medical field. I worked at a doctor's office, a very busy doctor's office. I saw things with my own eyes that I couldn't believe, and things that I learned about the system, if you will, were pretty disturbing. So I know for a fact, a first row point of view, that there are issues out there that we are dealing with, that we, again, I love science. I love modern medicine. I think that we save people really well. I think we're really good at treating people acutely. I think we're great at surgeries. I don't think we do very well with chronic conditions. And I think that the interests, the monetary interests are so great that they push policies to the point where those policies make their way into the media runs that, and we're left with a situation where the public at large doesn't have time much past reading a headline, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah.
And look, it's tough to ask a person to do your own, when you say something like that, do your own research, like, what does that actually mean to a person? And so, a lot of times people just don't have the time. And so they want to know who they can trust.
Right. But sometimes they're flailing about, like some of those moms. Like if I gently be like, here's some information, but do your own research. It's not like, for a while there, it was like, yeah, I put all my time into this. And then it's like, I don't know how you're going to receive this. I can only tell you this is my experience, my human experience. You still have to you have to do a little bit. Right. And almost no one has the time, but we do have the resources to do things quickly. AKA this instrument right here.
Exactly. Like using this and, going to a variety of places. And again, toggling back and forth between the result and outcome that you want to hear or that you think that
Right.
is true, and the one that is opposing it. It's really important to carry. If you could carry two opposing ideas at the same time in your brain, you're onto something.
Yes.
You
Thank you for
know,
saying that. Yes.
because look, I've had to pivot a lot of times on these things, like, oh, I just found out something new that that changes my recommendations. That's not easy. That's not an easy thing for someone in my position to have to confront, because it means that I might have to talk to clients and say, actually, I found out some new information on that. I'm going to change that recommendation. That's not easy to say.
It's humbling, but it sure as hell makes you honest.
But I'll
And I
tell you,
appreciate that.
in the established institutions, it's very tricky because they tend to stay the same. And we can see that in dietary recommendations. They tend to kind of stay stuck for a long time. We can see that in schooling. The way education is delivered, it just kind of stays frozen for a long time. In the public setting, a lot of it is just like there's not really a big incentive to change it. We can just kind of keep doing the same thing we've always done. And then also the other part of it is, oh, well, what are we going to like say that we were wrong for the last 30 years? That's just a hard pill to swallow. So they tend to not do that.
Yeah.
And then we find out years later, like, this thing that we've been trusting all these years turns out it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where this whole idea of consensus can be sticky, can be a problem, because breakthroughs by definition is something that which is obviously going to directly confront the consensus. I talked about ulcers. They used to remove your stomach if you had an ulcer because they thought it was from stress.
Mm-hmm.
And then a guy was saying, nope, it's a bacteria. It's H. pylori. And nobody believed this guy. So he had to literally give himself H. pylori in front of his colleagues to induce an ulcer and then cure it with an antibiotic.
Just to prove and show.
We no longer cut people's stomach out for ulcers, and we were cutting people's stomach out for ulcers as recent as the 80s.
Oh, yeah. I had a great aunt who had no stomach. Yeah. Yeah. She drank grape juice. Yeah.
It could have been fixed with a single antibiotic.
Yep.
This is where, and this also kind of goes into, if your bias is, antibiotics are always bad, stay away from antibiotics. Like, really? No, that's not true. Like, so we have to.
That's a lot of my community, a lot of my granola
we have
community.
To be careful with that. And right? I end up with like everybody hating me eventually. That's kind of my trajectory. It's like everybody just basically, because I piss everybody off. I'm sorry, because this is eventually I'm just going to be calling everybody out, because what ends up happening is that scientific findings get politicized and they end up in these one of two buckets. And you're just like, that can't be that way. There's going to be wrong and right on both sides here when we start to really start looking. If we're really looking at the truth, we have to be honest and say, there are times that you're going to need an antibiotic. I'm sorry.
I hear you.
And we have to kind of get to this point of like, because it's going to make us more intellectually sharp when it comes to these things. But if you're just kind of aligned so hard that you dig your heels in on one position, that you just cannot open your mind up to the fact that, like, yes, maybe, we can use, there's a kind of a best of both worlds.
Yeah.
And, so these are the kind of things that I just encourage people to kind of think about today.
Yeah. I want to say, and I want to thank you, Lawrence, and for anyone either new watching today or you've been following us on our journey. If you are new today, please look back at our old episodes, because Lawrence, what you've been able to do, and now that I'm recalling this, you're delivering the information with the root, with the basics, with roots. There's no like perspectives and opinions. It's the science of the root, like vitamin, a mineral, the organs that it works, this like basics. If we can all get back to the basics of our health, of our children's health, then this inundation of information and war, it'll be a little more easy to discern, because the root and the basics of fundamental health and for optimum health. And I think that's what's been happening in every episode. You've been able to deliver information that could be like in a simpleton kind of thing, but you have to have that base to go off to try all these other theories with. And so thank you for
it's called a Pareto Principle. which is
Mhm.
kind of like my final point here, is the Pareto Principle. They also call it like the 80-20 rule.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
to give you an example, I used to DJ weddings, and 20% of my music that I had on hand, I'd play that 80% of the time, right? Or you look at organizations, 20% of the personnel at an organization does 80% of the work, right? Or if you want to learn a language, 20% of the words you're going to use 80% of the time. So that Pareto principle is really important. You don't need to know everything, but knowing the basics, like you said, can be really, really valuable. And it doesn't have to be overcomplicated. I think that, the reason that, at least for me and people like in the health community that I'm kind of exposed in, and kind of my people, right? Our people, we default to the natural order of things often because we know that it has a track record. Like
Mm.
good old fashioned whole foods, they work. And when we see the studies now on processed foods, they just keep getting worse and worse and worse with the information. Now we're left with this decision of like, we're going to live in a world where there's an environment, say, of processed food everywhere. How are we supposed to navigate that? And are we going to be treated like hippies because we want, I posted this thing, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, where it was like, if your grocery store has a health food section, what does that say about the rest of the store?
Oh yeah, that's good.
Right? It's like,
Healthy
what does
food
that mean?
here.
Like if there's like this a little corner in your grocery store that says health food, you just kind of got to ask yourself. That's just kind of a common sense question to ask, right? We're being fear mongering by saying like, maybe just ask a simple a question.
Mhm.
Like, what is
Mhm.
that telling us?
Mhm. Mhm.
And the pendulum swings, right? Now
Mhm.
we've got the pushback against diet culture, which I agree. Okay, yeah, diet culture is no good. But I also agree it's not good to swing over to corporate fast food culture either. Like, is that
Mhm.
the answer? That we're just going to like not have any kind of consideration over what these things are going to do to our body? And trust me, it's like I've been throughout the spectrum of like, when you when you really research some of this stuff can really start freaking you out. And you want to start running around ringing bells and letting everyone know. But you have to take a step back and be like, okay, wait a minute. We have to kind of think about our delivery here. And if our goal is to really educate, how do we go about doing that when we're interacting with people? Well,
Mm.
we have to meet them where they're at, understand that they have their information that they're going by. And we have to meet people as people and find a common humanity. And again, to go to full circle this and to go back to the beginning, yes, I understand your point of view because you probably blah, blah, blah. Now, if you know their side better than they do, now all of a sudden you've won respect.
Mm.
Now all of a
Mm.
sudden it's like, oh, you actually have actually looked into this issue on both sides, or all 10 sides or 20 sides, or however many there are of a certain issue. So, I think that the common thread through all this is a basic sense of humility, curiosity, and humanity. And, discernment, that takes time. And
And patience.
yeah,
And patience. A lot of patience.
and there's nothing wrong, by the way, there's nothing wrong with, because a lot of times people will dismiss something what they call anecdotal evidence. Just remind people like anecdotal evidence is the weakest form of evidence, but
Mhm.
it's still a form of evidence. And the other important thing is evidence does not mean proof.
Mm.
That's another thing I see people getting wrong. Like, this is the evidence. That does not mean this is the proof.
Mm.
Evidence is not proof. Like, we've found a glove at the scene of the crime. We found some evidence. That is evident. That might play a role into finding out who did the crime. That's not proof of who did the crime. That is evidence at the scene of the crime.
Mm.
And so anecdotal evidence can actually be very valuable, but just know it's the weakest form. And so, people tend to just, oh, that's just an anecdote and you just throw it away. I mean, well, no, it is a form of evidence. It's just, and you can acknowledge it's the weakest form, but it is a form.
Mhm.
And there are going to be outliers in everything. There are going to be situations where it's going to be a one-of-one situation. That does not work that way for me. You know,
Such the researcher you are.
we just need to, I think that dose of humility and knowing your confirmation bias and knowing the Dunning-Kruger and understanding that is like the first big step in being able to kind of an approach to doing your own research, you know, and then from there, yeah, it's a grind.
Yeah.
It's a grind, and it's not easy. And actually, truth be told, real research is done in the lab. I mean, what we're actually doing is we're researching other people's research. Unless we're actually doing the experiments ourselves,
right?
We are
and it will
trusting
take
the work
time.
of others.
It will take a little bit of time. You've got to grant yourself that. If you really want to line up with what is your truth, you have the time. Just make the time. That's all I have to say about that.
And invest in, and real quick too, I think one more big thing is invest in, look at the outcomes, meaning if there are policies that you are standing by like so firmly, look at historically the outcomes of those. I mean, it staggers my mind when people still support policies that are decades old that, well, look at the outcomes. Question that. Well, how has that worked out so far is another great question. And so to like the homeschool community, homeschool moms, I think they're all tuned into this message quite clearly because they're looking at like, what are the outcomes? What's our ROI on our education system? In places like where we're from, Chicago, how much money is going in and what are they getting back? So do you need to be a public education expert? This is the take home of this is, do you need to be a public education expert to understand that the outcomes aren't ideal versus the amount of energy we're putting in? And then we can look at some forms of alternative education and break some of the myths. You know, a common myth: homeschool kids aren't socialized,
Antisocial,
right?
yeah,
Like, I mean, that
funny.
is like
that's the funniest one.
That's one that is still out there, right? There's a lot of these kind of things, and so it means like go to the source. If you're out there and you're considering homeschooling, it's like get into a homeschool mom community or whatever, and ask that question. And what are those answers? And do those answers hold up against the arguments against homeschool for that, right?
Right.
And every time that I've read into that, it's clear that is an absolute myth. And if anything, it's the opposite. Sorry.
No, it's totally the opposite.
Sorry.
And there's nothing like boots on the ground, information of
and real quickly, and why is that? Because in real life, right, real quick, on a public school level, we're asking all the 8-year-olds to socialize with 8-year-olds, right? And like one adult. But in the world, there's different people of different ages. And exposure outside of that homogenized classroom environment will rapidly socialize a child. No problem. Like they're talking to an 18-year-old, an 80-year-old.
Yeah.
They're 10 years old. They're talking to like a 4-year-old out on the playground. They have a play date with mixed ages.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's like the languages. You can be in a classroom learning a language for a year, but if you go to the actual country, maybe a month, you can digest the same amount of information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How does the world actually operate? So a lot of times it's just those kind of take a step back, common sense, and push back against your own biases and your own misconceptions about this thing. I think a lot of this also is fear. Well, we hear something that we've never really heard before, or that's a statement that just sounds a certain way. Well, ask yourself the question, what is true about that? What is true? And then look for the opposing side. So yeah, I think there's a whole lot more that we can do with this alone. And that's kind of my spiel for today, Heidi.
I love it. Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. I know I was just about to go on a whole nother pivot on it.
No, go for it. Yeah.
Well, my whole bit is I'm part of so many different communities: truther community, disclosure community, UFO community, the homeschool mom community, like all these communities. And you get people delivering information, and they themselves are the bow. They're delivering this information, and they're wrapping it all in a pretty bow. Like I love the ones that are, the really pretty peeps that have all the right tech filters and everything, and they don't have children, but they're talking about children, or it's,
Right.
or, star
Yeah.
season experiences, but they're their own personal experience and it's their truth, but they're pushing it on it. Like, you have to be mindful where your information is coming from as well. That was my other little tidbit of
Understand
it.
that we're all in a different
Yeah.
grade level, if you will, in this journey of like, and we can all learn. That's another great point, is that we can all learn something from everybody.
From
when
everybody.
anybody that you're talking to, I guarantee, knows things you don't.
Right.
And vice versa.
Yeah. To get rid of it in information war, the class system, the hierarchies, that kind of thing, I think would be beneficial. But it's going to take a lot of people humbling themselves and checking their egos to understand that they have just as much power to have this knowledge and find it themselves as, you can get pieces from people, but to be solely dependent on somebody because they are the face of something, I think be mindful of that. Because there's always controlled op.
Any kind of centralized authority you'd want to be cautious of, because anything centralized that doesn't have competition is by nature a monopoly, and we know that runs you into trouble.
Yeah,
things need competition. Ideas need competition to strengthen themselves, right? May the best idea win in the public square. If certain ideas are not allowed in the public square, we don't even know if the best idea won or not. We just know that the idea that was thrust upon us is out in front in the narrative. And when certain ideas aren't allowed to compete, we have a problem. And so just know that, good ideas are good ideas, and they will stand the test of time if they are good ideas. They just need to be allowed a voice. And yeah, I think just the public at large, if we could all be humble with one another, just understand that the other person does not know what you know, think what you think, see the world the same way, but there is something I guarantee you have in common with every other human being on this planet. And if we can find that, we might disagree, we might, argue over data and policies and this and that, but to be respectful and to attack ideas. Some of my closest friends through the years, I literally think 180-degree opposite of them on many, many things.
Oh, yeah. Same.
And it's just the way it is. And I'm totally okay with it, because am I going to burn down a great friendship when I know a person's intention and heart are there? No, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it to me. Now, I've had people walk away on me, and that's okay too. I wish them well, right? But for me, I'm always going to be here. I'm just trying to find, if we're all trying to find the truth together, we can make this work. But if it becomes like, I'm against you, it's my idea against yours, then now we're adversaries. We're no longer connected.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's rough.
And I think this is important under the Kids Health series, because as parents, guardians, your sole business is to help children in their health and fitness and nutrition, to the compassion and humanity of it all. Yeah. Bringing back the patience, the compassion, humble. It's war. So it's like all of us, we have to band together a little bit and show compassion for one another, and not treat each other like dirt for the information they're delivering. That's just where they're at. I don't know if we're going to get everybody at the same level of, just remembering our human experience. I can tie in my little human experience hangout series, because that's my bliss, is hearing people's journeys of sharing their human experience and being of service to others. And the thread of most all of those episodes is the compassionate humanity they have for each other and the way they deliver information. I think if we just remember these basic, simple things of being human, we can navigate information war a little more better.
Yeah.
Compassionately. I don't know.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, folks, just a gentle reminder, Mr. Kids Get Healthy himself, here it comes. Check it out. And you can reach Lawrence at kidsgethealthy.com. I'm also going to share your trailer at the end here. And again, Lawrence, thank you for taking this time with me to just converse in this manner, because I do consider you an intellect and very wise and one of the most fabulous researchers I've ever met. I know in 2020 we went hard, and in 21 and we started doing these
Yeah.
videos, but we're literally now having to dodge a lot of censorship and suppression. And the key of staying afloat, I think we've stayed in the heart through it all. So we're going to keep doing what we're doing and share what we know to the best of our abilities with others. So if you have not caught any of the other episodes, please check them out on our Rumble channel. I'll link it down below, as well as on my YouTube, Heidi Pop from Los Angeles, and Lawrence's Kids Get Healthy YouTube, as well as Facebook Live events. So there's nowhere you can't see these episodes. And, start finding your team of people that deliver information the way Lawrence do. It's the roots, it's back to the basics, and it's through the heart. And I just
always
think that's
question
everything. Always question. We're all little scientists.
Always question. You have every right. You have every right. The scientific method is for everyone. So don't ever let anyone make you feel like this big for doing your own research, because we all have a right to question whatever we want. So I encourage that. Just do it with humility.
Boom.
Boom.
Mic drop. Okay.
Roll it.
Thank you. Thank you, Lawrence. And I'll see you again in 2 weeks. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks, everybody.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thanks.